Welcome to Talk About Your Community. I'm your host, Todd Nilson, and today we're exploring how the clarity of a leader's mind shapes the resilience of their community. We're joined by Dain Dunston, a founding partner of Reservoir LLC and author of Being Essential. Dain has spent 30 years coaching elite leaders to operate with radical self-awareness, and today we'll be diving into his latest work with Dr. Leonard Keurig on reclaiming genius and what it means for the communities that we build. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You have tuned into Clocktower Advisors. I'm Todd Nilson, your host. This is Talk About Your Community, the name of the show. And on this show, we bring together all kinds of really interesting, smart, thoughtful people who are talking about the ways that we come together, online, offline, and really hybrid versions of community as well. And today, as I mentioned, we've got Dain Dunston here, and author of Being Essential and the founding partner of Reservoir LLC. Dain, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here, Todd. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. The weather is warming up here in northeastern Wisconsin, so it's a little bit soppy outside, but the temperatures are starting to feel a little bit spring-like, which is odd for February, but
yeah,
okay, I'm on board.
Well, you know, I'm outside of Austin, and we've had some cold weather, but the last few days have been high 70s, low 80s. So it's nice out. Go sit outside this evening, and it's great.
Well, this is our second take for people that are in for this. We had tried to do a live stream for the previous version of this interview. The tech gods were not kind to us, but we've managed to beat them into submission at this point, and I'm very happy to see that we're able to get together and have this conversation. I've been excited to have this. I know you and I have had a couple of really good offline interactions about your work and your book, and you're thinking about like reclaiming our genius from the time that we're little kids. And I've been eager to jump back into the conversation with you again from a community building perspective. Some of the work that I do. Where would be a good place for us to begin? Because I can think of a couple of different entry points, but I don't want to legislate that.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's talk about building communities. So let me talk about what I've done. I've had, 3 or 4 careers over the years. And in my middle 30s, I felt like I was unhappy with everything. I was really at a turning point. And I felt that what I really needed to do was write. And I wanted to go do that, learn how to. I was writing already, but I wasn't earning a living at it. I was editing a yoga magazine. I was writing poetry and song lyrics and had been doing that since high school, and then doing other things to make money along the way. But I needed something different. So I was thinking about the idea of quality and had read some books that really gave me some thinking about that. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, for one. And I was really looking at the issues at the time of cars that were being made in America, and they were pretty crummy. And I was working for a company at the time, running a division of a company that had a fleet of security vehicles for industrial security at factories and office buildings and stuff. And they were really junky. They just were really poor quality. And so I thought about that, and I said, I got an idea. What I want to say before I tell the story is, we think we're people who have ideas, and that these ideas spring from our awareness, and they're very good. But I would say it's just the opposite. We spring from our ideas. And there are ideas out there who want to find us and go somewhere with us. And maybe sometimes we can find them. So this was one of those moments. And so I wrote this article called How Chevrolet Lost Its Mojo. I sent it off to Road and Track magazine, and it was honestly, it was so good. I knew they were going to have to publish it, and I never heard a word back from them. I didn't even get a rejection letter.
Wow.
I'd had any of those before.
That's cold.
About 2 months later, I got a phone call, and there was this voice on the other end saying, "Hi, my name's Don Runkle. I'm the chief engineer of General Motors. I want to talk about your article." I'm going, uh-oh. And he says, no. He says, we made it required reading in the C-suite. We've been trying to say this. We've been trying to express this for 10 years. You got it in 10 pages. And he says, could you turn this into a speech for me? What do you do? And I said, well, of course, I'm a speechwriter. Yes, I could do that for you.
Love it. I love it.
And so the next, literally, that was a Thursday afternoon. The following Tuesday, I was on a plane to Detroit. I sort of vaulted into the C-suite from like no experience. Well, not no experience. I had grown up with a father who was on the fast track to become a CEO by the time he got 45 and did it. So I had some real insights into what it was like to be a CEO and what it could do for you, positive and negative. That turned into a career over 30 years that still continues today, where I'm working for large organizations, large corporations, smaller. I've really had a great time doing it. It's been phenomenal. I've worked with some amazing people over the years. So that was great. And it was a good community. If you think about it's that work, putting on big corporate events, is a little bit like putting on movies. You have a community of talented people. You have different communities of production companies who hire freelancers. So I work from home. I work for maybe 4 or 5 different companies at a time, and they would, look for my time, and it was fun. And we would all work remotely. This was back in the 90s, but we all worked remotely, which sometimes would fly to a meeting or something. But and then we would all end up, in Las Vegas or Orlando somewhere in a big hotel or convention center, and we'd be doing what we do together. As that went along, that speech writing went to speech coaching, because not just what are you going to say, but who are you going to be when you're on that stage. And then people would come off the stage, and one by one, a few of them started asking me for, why don't you coach me on who to be when I'm off the stage and working in your company? So what happened is, somewhere about 2017, I got to a point where I thought, I really want to move on to really full-time coaching people. I'd written some books by that point that were aligned to that work. I thought, this is the way to go ahead and do it. And I was at a conference. And so again, the idea of, I began as an idea that wanted to happen. So now I'm switching to the next thing. The next idea, I was at a conference, sat down in an empty chair at a table to have a discussion. And somebody next to me was an older woman, but I had a sense, I knew who she was, but I couldn't think. A little later on, I found out that she was from Atlanta. She was the very first female PR agency in the city, worked for some of the biggest names in Atlanta. And so I took her aside and said, hey, I got an idea. I have this idea for starting a coaching company so we could get more stuff. And I said, I'm good at coaching some people, but I'm probably not good at coaching other people. And what if we had different coaches that we could put together? And she said, oh, I like that. So we talked about it for a couple of months. About 2 months later, she calls me from another conference. She'd been sitting at a table, and a chair next to her, some guy sat down, and they started talking about what she was working on. And she mentioned this work. And he said, I'd love to do that. I do coaching. That sounds great to me. And so she called me, and I said, well, who is he? And he said, well, his name is Peter Olson. He's the former CEO of Random House. I went, well, I mean, he's not going to want to work with me. But he did. And so then I called in somebody I had done some work with, who I was coaching. He was a professor at the New School and had written a book, but was having trouble talking about it. So I worked with him about how to do that. Brilliant guy. And then I was at another conference, and there was an empty table, last seat in the conference. I got in late, sat down to this next guy, and we shared a glass of wine, or a bottle of wine, Eric McNulty from Harvard. And he said, well, I went in too. So the 5 of us got together, in the beginning of 2018, started this company. The two professors couldn't have any equity in it, but the other three of us did. Got some customers and started going and started growing. And what happened was we tried to build a community with those 5 people. And we were unable to do it because of some things that I'll mention in a second. I loved them, but unable to build a community. In the end of 2019, I put together a proposal for a large electronics company that had a lot of dealers who were family businesses, and some big ones. Some of them had 500 employees and 150 or 250 million dollars. Some were smaller. They thought they could support those companies and keep the next generation of owners coming up there if we could give them some training and some discipline and some reason to stay with the company. So we created a next generation development group for them, signed up a bunch of those companies, and it just took off. It was great. So now we really had a community in one part of we had about 10 different companies, and we had 2 or 3 young people from those communities who were like moving up in the things. We got all together once a month. I coached them individually once a month. We had some get-togethers. It was really phenomenal and really fun. Right about that time, my other 2 original partners went at each other's throats, and the whole thing ended up in my lap. The former CEO took off like one of the clients that we had. I took the other one, and that was about it. Here's what's happened. Over those years from 2020, we got started, got what did we get? Not quite 90 days into the year and got hit by COVID. Mm-hmm. So everything had to stay remote. But it turned into this community where we have 16 or 17 different coaches around the world doing different things and offering different things. And it's been really, really fun. Been a little flat the last couple of years. We haven't been able to put all of them to work, but it's still a community. We meet and talk and do things.
Sure.
Then another idea wanted to happen that I didn't even know about. I had written this book called Being Essential, which is basically the neuroscience of what's called neuroplasticity, although I didn't know that word when I started in on the work and wrote it. But it's how you can change your mind. How do you rewire your mind? And it's called Being Essential, 7 Questions for Living and Leading with Radical Self-Awareness. And what happened was there was this group starting up. I got a call one day from a PhD neuroscientist in Switzerland who said, look, we're putting this group together and we want you in it. And I ended up in this community of coaches, consultants, neuroscientists, psychologists, and have been working with them ever since. And so without meaning to, community after community kind of developed based on ideas that it wasn't that I had the idea came looking for me.
I love that so much because there's so many good things I'd like to unpack here, and I'm hoping we can get to a lot of them during the course of the conversation. Yeah. First of all, that idea of the ideas forming the self is really, I'm probably misappropriating how you said it. But that idea of ideas forming the self. But I think what I'm also hearing is ideas form the community as well. So following that concatenation of ideas, things that one thing leads to another, it introduces new people come into the space, they're attracted. Ideas are the currency that attract people to a community. And that's a powerful concept, I think, for especially a lot of organizations that struggle to define the purpose of a community. They just say, we want a community, but they don't really know what it is. They don't know why it's there. But beginning with the idea, beginning with the purpose, like a lot of times, and this is probably something that I think enterprises struggle more with than nonprofits that tend to be very purpose driven. A lot of enterprises think they need to build the community around their product or service and what they're doing. But it's about the deeper behavior. It's about the identity driven behaviors, not the transactional, like how do I fix my widgets on my computer to do things.
Right. So let me take that a step further, because I just a couple of weeks ago heard a conversation between David Eagleman and Danielle Persick, who's a cognitive scientist and is doing some really interesting work for Google now. And a question came out of that conversation, which was, is intelligence a product of individual brains, or is it something that emerges from many brains trying to align? And I would say that is, if not the definition of, the essence of community.
Absolutely. I think, you ask a community manager on the street, a community professional on the street, what is your definition of community? You will hear some version of what you just said, which is that it's people that are brought together by a common interest, who then form friendships or do things, but they want to come back to that place again, and because those brains are seeking alignment with each other.
Yeah. Exactly. And one of the reasons they're seeking alignment, and the Dr. Persick talked about this a lot, she says, go back to the very earliest days of hunter-gatherers. And she said, we used to think that was 30,000 years. Now we've finally figured out it's 300,000 years ago.
Yes.
And nobody was very intelligent in the sense of, it was very, very hard to come up with new ideas. If you had a tribe of hunter-gatherers with 30 people in it, there was no unlikelihood of much new thinking. But if you looked across the river one day and there were another 30 people over there, and you figured out how to talk with each other, and then you looked at your partners and said, look at the way they're doing those hammers. Look, they've made those hammers. Never thought of doing it that way. Now, our intelligence just increased because we had another idea that came from some other mind. They're doing the same thing, looking across the river at us and saying, wow, look at the way they did their fire. That's really interesting. What if we, and that's what makes intelligence, but it's also what makes community.
I love that. I think that there's so much power in that. And it makes me think of, something else that you said, which was, that you're trying to rewire your brain. Anytime we try to rewire our brain, that act of changing one's thinking is very interesting because there's a comic book author, I'll just call him an author, but I first encountered him with comic books many years ago, back in the 90s. He wrote a very short-lived series in the early 2000s called Dr. Sleepless, Warren Ellis. And the character is about sort of a mad scientist. He's got this, I won't get into the plot because it's meaningless, with this, but one of the things he does is he goes to South America and finds a tribal shaman and says he wants to permanently change his brain. And so, part of what he does is he decides he wants to take ayahuasca to kind of change his perception of reality. But I think that's a little bit of a cheat. Sure. Psychedelics could be a cheat code for something like that, and don't do drugs, kids, or whatever obligatory message I have to say here. But I think the original way to change your brain is to meet with and talk to other people who are maybe doing things a little differently than yourself.
Yeah. It is the essence of it. So let me throw a question at you. The question is, what do we think we're talking about when we talk about community?
Wow, that's a big question. So I think there's something innately, there's something built into us that makes us want to be social, makes us want to be with each other. Sure, there are people in the world who claim they like to be hermits and they don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to be connected, but that's kind of the exception to the rule. I believe. I think we crave companionship. We crave the interaction of ideas. I think part of our evolutionary advantage is our ability to adapt and come up with new ideas, and that's through those interactions that happens. And so especially as I think about how anxious people are about AI, driving us further apart, I don't think that's in the cards for us. I think it's evolutionarily baked in, to what we are as people. And I don't know if that's a question.
No. I mean, I think that's a great, and there's no right answer. I just want to it's one of those words like intelligence, right? It's one of those words that everybody thinks they know what they're talking
Oh,
about when they're talking about it.
yeah.
But
Don't get me started, man. That's a soapbox for me. Like,
yeah,
I think it's one of the most abused words in language
yes, yeah,
community, because I would say it's one of those things where people have this notion of it being just a warm, fuzzy hug. What's not to like about it?
right, right,
Um, but then they appropriate it to everything. And
yeah,
so, I mean, yeah, maybe your neighborhood is a community if there is that sense of connection and belonging, for people that are there. But I would argue your social media network is not a community, and your like nations and cities are not communities, but they might be made up of many communities
yes,
within
well
those
said,
spaces. So
yeah,
it's somewhere between a family unit
yeah,
sociologically and a city. And
yeah,
so, like, bigger than a family unit, smaller than smaller than a city, but maybe a village is a good middle point. Like Robin Dunbar's numbers about 200. And
yeah,
so people that you can have strong connections with, strong ties with.
160. What?
Yeah.
So one of my daughters lives in Manhattan. Manhattan is not a community, although there are things that you have in common with a lot of other people when you're living there. So you can get a sense of community sometimes, even on blocks that aren't your neighborhood. But she lives up in Washington Heights, and that is a neighborhood where you can be walking the streets and have conversations with people that you don't even know. Oh, you've got a poodle. I got a poodle too. Look at him. What's his name? That's kind of a makeup of a community. Now I've just met somebody. I may not see him, but 2 weeks later, hey, where's your dog? And that's how we build it. We may not go to work together. We may not, go beat drums together.
Yeah, totally, man. So my wife and I take walks on the beach. We're on Lake Michigan, and
Yeah,
we're fortunate. We're across the street from the beach. In the middle of winter, even we're out walking
yeah,
through the snow on the beach,
yeah,
and there are other people who walk that beach.
yeah,
And like, while we don't know any of them deeply, we know and recognize the people who show up. Oh, there's Grok with his two dogs, or there's this other gentleman who always says,
yeah,
good morning, the weather's fine. But you derive that sense of connection with them because we're in the same place. We have same interests.
yeah,
Obviously, we all like the beach, and
yeah,
we want to be in the outdoors.
yeah. And that gives a start of that. I've worked with so many CEOs over the years and division presidents and stuff. And I would say I can only think of one or two of those companies that really were a community. May have been, maybe there was a division or an office under a particularly bright or open leader who could do that. But there was one that's an enormous example of community, and that's Chili's Bar and Grill.
Okay.
And they were started in 1975. A restaurant in Dallas, a little corner of most everybody who started working there, kind of a nutty owner, but everybody else who was working there was probably wearing bell bottoms and
Nice.
and boat shirts and kind of that kind of stuff. And they had a real community. And then they built a second one down in Houston, and it's just started growing. People who, when I started working with them in the mid 90s, what I discovered is almost everybody, by that time they owned like 6 or 7 different restaurant brands, but everybody who was in a top layer of management there probably had been in one of the first 5 or 6 restaurants. Different. One guy started who became the head of Chili's for a number of years. Started at age 16 in the restaurant when he was in high school. All of these things, and they had a culture in those early restaurants. They had what they called a 3-drink policy.
Okay.
You could have 3 drinks, but after that, you had to pay for the next one as you were on duty. So a lot of them met their spouses working there in those first few years. And there were rumors that some of them conceived some children in there in the first few years.
Uh-huh.
So come back, that was 20 years later. So that was 1975. Now it's 1994, 95. And that's still what it feels like at the home office. And that's still what they make happen at the restaurant. And that's why they were so hugely successful. Another company that got very close to that was TGI Fridays. But somewhere they couldn't hold on the way that Chili's does, and Chili's is still booming.
What do you think it was that if you feel comfortable speaking about it?
Yeah, I do. I worked with both for quite a while. And I worked with Fridays. Really tried in the like 2010, 2011. They had a brilliant new CEO who I had known and worked with him somewhere else. He brought me in, really doing good. They realized that they had to go back to the original definition of that, what that restaurant was, which was a safe place for single women to go have an evening out and meet men, but it was safe in behavior. And they did a really good job at that. And it was growing. Something happened after that leadership team left. And I don't know. I haven't been able to study it. But that's what happens at so many companies. Look at what's happening with Southwest Airlines right now. They have abandoned everything that, well, not everything, but they abandoned many of the things of the Southwest Airlines experience that made that so powerful in the early days. And passengers are saying this isn't the. I used to fly. I love Southwest. I don't want to fly.
Guys, So a couple of things there. So the thing that stood out for me with the Chili's description you gave me was that there was something in the rules of that organization, the three drinks and then you get your own, that there was an implicit permission to be sociable.
Yes.
In that place, and it became almost a ritual or a part of what that the cultural markers.
Yes.
Community. That's something I was listening for. That you were telling me about. TGI Fridays, what I suspect is what they ran into with lots of other companies do this. Over the past year or so, I've been trying to rewire my brain a little bit to think about why does community have such a hard time in corporate environment?
Yeah.
And I think it's because community is essentially this egalitarian thing that is subversive to hierarchies.
Yes.
So if you have a top-down command structure for an organization, most organizations have an org chart of some sort.
Yeah.
But those org charts are more or less meaningful depending on the culture of the organization.
Right.
But when you try to introduce the idea of a community beyond just the mere buzzword, we're going to set up a community, for our XYZ company or whatever. Yeah. If you are that command and control culture and you are nervous about opening up that space because you're worried about what are our customers going to say, or our employees, are they going to come into this place and say embarrassing things about the brand?
Yeah.
And then they want to start controlling, what's said in it. It's very uncomfortable for some organizations and some cultures to make a go of it with it. What I suspect happened with the TGI Friday situation, of course, I'm totally speculating about that, was that a command and control culture came into place. They didn't know about sort of the openness of the space. They didn't know that whole social guideline about a safe place for women to go to the restaurant. They didn't understand that as part of the cultural bedrock of that organization. And then they swept that away because they said, "Oh, that's a soft thing. We don't, we're here for the profit. We're here to make a profitable operation. Yeah. That's why we were brought in." And a lot of executives, when they come in, they're trying to upset the world a little bit, try to do bold things to bring value back to their shareholders. And I wonder if that's what happened, and if that's exactly what's been happening with Southwest as well.
I think it is. And it happens with a lot of companies. Southwest had a culture, and my friends Kevin and Jackie Freiberg wrote a great book a while ago called Nuts, Southwest's Secret for Success. And one of the things that happened is the laws changed where you could have more airlines going on, and they deregulated the whole airline industry. And before that, had been virtually impossible to start a new airline. So now it's deregulated, and some people in Texas say, let's do this. We're going to have like 2 or 3 planes, and all they will do is fly in between Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, in this triangle, around and around and around. And it'll just be great, and it'll be cheap, and we'll do that. What happened was the other airlines, some of which are no longer here in Texas, said no and sued them. They went all over all this stuff. So now they had to get this lawyer, and this lawyer is trying to get them going. And it took 3 years of fighting. But in those 3 years, they developed a culture, a sense of community that was so powerful, because they were being attacked from every direction. And they just had one thing that they wanted to do, and this was their product, to make it safe and easy to travel. When for the long time they had, you are now free to move around the country. That was what they were saying. That's what they wanted to sell. And so to do that, they had to keep costs down. You know, you had this culture where people would go there to be pilots or flight attendants when they could have made more at American Airlines or United, but they liked it there. And the pilots would get to the gate, and they had to turn around and be backing up in 20 minutes, the entire plane loaded, which meant sometimes the pilots, while they're inspecting around the plane, making sure everything's good on the outside, they're helping load luggage, the pilots. That's the kind of culture it was. They finally figured out that it was okay for the flight attendants on the mic to make jokes and be funny while they were doing the safety stuff. So that was great. A lot of that stuff got shut down in the last few years. A friend of mine's on the board. I'm not sure if he's any more on the board. He may have walked by now. So
yeah. But those things that made it stand out, the behaviors, the words, like a lot of communities have like a marker of like their own glossary of terms, their own ways and rituals that are involved with being in that space. That if those are lost, that community becomes unmoored and drifts apart. And communities absolutely can die.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or you get 150 different communities in each store or restaurant or plant or whatever it is, and it's just not the same.
I want to ask you a question, and then I want to do a pivot. So you've worked with a lot of executives, over the years. Do many of them talk about or seem to care about community specifically as a word? And I have some preconceptions about this, but because you've worked with many of them as a coach, as a confidant, you know, for some of that work, community profession as an industry has seen a lot of churn in the last couple of years by large enterprises that have just dumped their online community spaces. And to me, it feels like dropping your frontline workers who are providing all the customer success and customer connection there in favor of acquisition tactics and things like that. And so I'd love to know your take on that.
You know, there's been some huge changes in the last decade, particularly since 2020, of course. The whole world has changed so phenomenally, and in that time, I've been primarily working with small businesses, which has been interesting. Mm-hmm. And the ones that work there, they really try to be communities. They're really trying to do this. There's a company that's a copier dealer that I have worked with for years in central Ohio called Woodhull, and they're 75 years old. The grandfather started a copier, or started a office equipment company back in the 60s, and then that grew up. They sold it to another big company that was sort of buying up all these little family businesses, and then the daughter bought the company back and restarted it. She just turned it over to her son, who's in his early 30s. But they're so focused on community, and they did so. they did something that I've never heard of before. They have four different offices, and they had the son, as we were working with him. They gave him an unusual job. They made him the head of sales, training, and hiring in all four offices, which meant basically 4 days a week he was in each of the offices, and he was working with the people, making sure they were doing good, training, bringing them in, learning about it, learning about the differences in all the offices, and then coming back to the home office. But secretly, and this was not an intention, but secretly, because he was there, he was learning about the community in each office and what was happening there and what was working. And as he went around, he was able to offer suggestions and say, what if we did it this way in different places? They're doing up in Dayton, they're doing it this way.
Yes.
And now they've just taken the company over, or he's taken the company over. He just finished his first year as CEO. They turned it into an ESOP. So now it's a culture where everybody, if you work there long enough, you'll own a piece of the business, where you've got some real sense of we want to do things as a community. It's really interesting. This is a small business. They've got about 100 employees.
That's what you described is community building in action. I mean, visiting the different stakeholders, the different departments, the different groups within the organization, and helping them to recognize their likeness with the other places, and to start to go back to our original metaphor of the Neolithic time before, looking across the river at the other tribe and what they're doing, and trying to get some ideas from them. And maybe we should pool our resources and start working together.
Well, and in a lot of cases they did. If they didn't decide to kill each other, then they started working together. And killing each other, to be clear, is not community.
That is definitely the opposite of, right. So, Dain, I wanted to shift gears a little bit to go to one of the hooks for our conversation here today, which is that idea of reclaiming genius. So many of the community professionals that I work with are in a position where they're working in an organization. They're the person that is anointed as the community manager for a discussion forum, for a Slack group, for an in-person group that's meeting. They're typically a solo act on their own, and they are usually faced with questions of burnout. They're overloaded with having expectations around doing the social media and the community building, or all the marketing and scope creep. For their roles and what they do, and I think that they struggle. With that. Your book, reclaiming genius and being essential, is about sort of shedding a synthetic self and being more in touch with what our young brains were. Do you have some advice? You're going to sit down with somebody that's sort of in that situation. Where do you start? How do you help them to reclaim some of the energy and spark that they had?
Well, so much of the time, and this is true of most of us as human beings, we spend so much of our time trying to understand what's around us, understand what other people are doing, and trying to think about what's happening out there. And we're not spending a lot of time really intuitively thinking about what's going on inside here. I had a CEO of a very, very large company. They were a Fortune 350 company. They had been a division of a Fortune 150 company, but the board decided to spin them off, and now they were a standalone company. And the CEO had been in the C-suite because he'd been a division head. None of the people on his team had, though. So suddenly he had to deal with these people suddenly feeling all this pressure of being in this company, and the pressure they were under as the CFO now, or the HR. And so he says it's really hard. He says I sit here. I don't want to leave my office. I don't want to walk down the hallway because everybody's looking at me. They're trying to read my body language and my face and my tone of voice. And if I don't look good, then they're going to go start working on their resume and get the hell out of here because, well, what's going to happen? And there were some tough times at the start to make the transition. And so I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Every time you stand up to leave your office, I want you to pause for a second, put your hands on the desk, and ask yourself two questions. The first question is, who am I being? And this is a very simple question. There's no judgment there. It's not, if you're being a jerk, say, I'm being a jerk. It's not who you promised your mother you would be. There's none of that. It's just take a look inside you at who you're being right now. And I said, okay. Then the second question is, what do I want? And the language is very specific. Asking who you're being actually changes who you're being. Just asking the question. And then asking what you want probably will change, or changing who you're being will change what you want. And asking again will. So maybe you were going to get up and walk down the hallway and go into the marketing guy and say, what the hell is happening with this campaign? We spent $3 million on it. We're getting nothing. But now that's not what you want to do. You don't want to do that. What you want to do now is go down and see, how can I help? What do we need? And that changed everything for me. And again, sort of, you begin as an idea. I was going in there mostly to help them with communications and how to speak and talk. But as I got in there, I just felt we would do that, but they needed something deeper. And so suddenly this idea came up, and that was really when I really started the executive coaching. I mean, I'd done it over the years with executives who I was closer to, and they have this thing they call a CEO whisperer, where you can say things to him because he trusts you in a way that he can't trust anybody else around him. You're the one who's standing backstage helping him communicate his ideas, or her communicate her ideas. So that's really where that came from. So I think one of the things that's so important in my book, Being Essential, was how do we get radical self-awareness, and how do we get to the point where we're literally in a meeting, listening to how you're listening, thinking about how you're thinking, and feeling how you and the people around you feel the energy in the room. And that's radical self-awareness, being able to do that. So what happened, you brought up Reclaiming Genius. What happened there is, once I got involved with this gang of neuroscientists out of Europe and across the States, I was asked to do a workshop one day and sort of chair a conversation of 5 neuroscientists, 5 PhDs. And the topic was the link between neuroplasticity and spirituality. Because that's a place in spirituality, that is a place where we do want to change ourselves. We don't always want to know ourselves, but we do want to make ourselves better, or have some intention of that. And at the end of that thing, 3 of them asked me for coaching. And and that was when I quit worrying about the fact that I never actually graduated from college. One of them, we got into really good conversations with. We were actually sort of coaching each other. And that was Leo Keurig, who's up in Finland. Mm-hmm. And so we started talking all the time. And one day last spring, we were talking about this book that both of us had read called Presence, which is about how to change the way people are thinking. The very conversation we're having, how to help the ideas of the future come to life in your organization or in your community. One of the things that was quoted in that book was a study done in the 60s, supposedly by Howard Gardner at Harvard. He didn't do it, but this was what they had written in the book, that they studied the IQ of children 4 and 5 years old. 98% of them tested with genius intelligence, not IQ, because that's different, but genius intelligence. And then, 10 years later, they're down to 20% of them. And by the time they finish school, get to college, they're down to, 5%, 2% when they're adults. It just disappears. So, I'm talking to this neuroscientist, and I said, well, so where do you think it went, all that intelligence? And he said, I don't think it went anywhere. I think it got embedded in our body tissue. where it couldn't escape. And basically, we put it away and hid it, and now don't know how to get it back. And I said, well, okay, with what I work on and with what you work on, because he had just finished a book called Feel, Think, Move, sort of about the same thing. We said, what if we could help them reclaim that genius? And we kind of had this moment of silence between Austin and Helsinki. And so we went to work on it. And we came up with a framework. We put this workshop together, and it's not a course, but it has sort of 3 parts. That's beginner's mind, flowing together, and master's garden. And the idea is we put everybody together in a room or on a Zoom for first and third Saturday of each month. And we had people in Europe, we had people in South Africa, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. And what happened was, when we did that for 3 months, 6 different afternoons together, something profound changed. Everybody in the work who stayed with it, and there were 10 who started, felt that it had changed their life. They felt that they had profoundly had a sense of who they are, who they were being, and what mattered. And that was really, really powerful. And so that whole group that came together, some of them knew each other, but most we didn't. We're now working on 3 new work groups that'll be coming up this spring and this summer. Some of them are going to become facilitators in it. We're building a whole organization around it, and we've got people lining up to do it because they're hearing from each other what an experience it was to go in and do this. And so let me talk about one of the parts of it, because it'll come back to what our thing is. One of the parts is using 2 kinds of intelligence to create what we call flowing together. Mm-hmm. And the intelligence is reflective intelligence and relational intelligence. And as we worked through it, what we were discovering is that the reflective intelligence gave us that practice of really looking at reflecting on how we're speaking, reflecting on how we're thinking, reflecting on what's going on inside of us, even in the middle of a conversation. Who am I being as I'm sitting here talking to you? That can lead to a lot of great things, but then you apply it to something that we call relational intelligence, which is how we move together. And you then get something that's, well, imagine a improv jazz group. How do they do that? You know, the drummer starts up, picks up a beat, the bass comes in, and then pretty soon everybody's playing. I have no idea where you're going with that trumpet, but I'm listening to you, and suddenly I hear something, an idea that becomes something that is me, and bam, I come out of it. You look over and go, wow, okay, and so we're flowing together with that.
I love that.
Phil Jackson and one of his assistant coaches, when they were at the Bulls, I came up with something that the assistant coach had developed in college, and we called it the triangle offense. And what it was that the offensive triangle, that's the 3 players who basically run the ball down the court, they were no longer given any plays. They were discouraged from thinking out plays. What they got really good at was understanding where Todd might go and where Dain might go, and in between that. And then suddenly Dain's going down and he has a plan. He says, oh, I'm getting blocked here. Boom, over to Todd, because I know where you're going to go with it. Then when I know where you're going to go, I know where I need to be, so you can pass it to me or the third person, and we can get a basket. That's when they started winning the first of their 11 championship rings, because they were swarm leadership, flowing together. That whole community of that's what it was. They made the team a community, not just a bunch of competing superstars, which is where most sports teams are. A lot of sports teams are.
Yeah,
where it comes.
Well, Dain, I can't believe an hour has gone by here for a conversation. This has been such a fascinating. I feel like we could go for a couple more hours, really.
I think so.
But we're going to have to schedule a part 2.
Okay.
To this. But thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Your insights are amazing, and I think practical for community builders. And I hope some executive leaders take these messages to heart as well, and open
Right.
themselves up to a little more of a sense of community, managed from the edges and not from the center or from the top
Yeah.
of the hierarchy down.
Yeah.
And then if someone wants to learn a little bit more about you,
Yeah.
where can they go?
Find me on LinkedIn or at reservoir.llc and reservoirinstitute.org. And that's all getting developed. We're really in the middle of, I will tell you what's astonishing to me was 18 months ago, this was kind of become like a one-man shop, and we had all these guys around who could help and were available, and women, a lot of friends and a lot of colleagues, and it was a community, but there was not much going on. Now I am surrounded by people who want to take all this work that we're doing up to the next level. And that's really exciting. There's a community. So it's cool. So find me on LinkedIn.
Again, thanks so much for this. I am serious. I want to have a follow-up conversation with you about it.
Okay.
But for those of you who've stayed with us through this, if you have questions for Dain, please drop them in the comments or the remarks below. We try to get back to everybody who has something to say, and
Absolutely.
would love to get your reflections on everything too. And in the meantime, check out any of Dain's books, which are excellent. And I'm sure you can find out more about them through LinkedIn or going through his website. Until we see you again for the next show, please keep building great communities. But for the time being, close that laptop, get outdoors, breathe in the fresh air, feel the sun in your face, because you can't build great communities unless you take care of yourself first. We'll see you again soon. Dain, thanks again.
Thank you, Todd. Bye.